Good evening.
Okay, sorry about that. My name is Lawrence McGlynn, and you're listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 FM in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Blue Sky at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by councilmember Isaiah Thomas as we discuss the budget, school facilities, and his resign-to-run legislation. Lance Haver will interview Elowyn Corby from the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director of Vote Solar, and we will preview, as much as we can, tomorrow's budget hearing with the Mayor, Sherelle Barker. It's going to be a busy day tomorrow. Denise.
Oh, yeah. Tomorrow is one of those days where it's kind of like Philadelphia. It's kind of like the city's State of the Union address.
Yeah.
Where where all of the cabinet people come in, the mayor herself will be giving the address. You'll have like the police commissioner will be there. A whole lot of people that wouldn't normally be in city council will be there tomorrow. And there'll be like a whole lot of dignitaries too. There'll be state reps and state senators and, everybody who's anybody and has a say so in the budget process will be there. And it's going to be interesting to see, one, how many people show up.
Yep.
And two, what they'll be listening for as part of the budget presentation. Now, it's also one of those days where if you have access to WURD radio or the city's cable channel, Channel 64, that would be the best place to watch the budget hearing, the budget address. Because if you actually come to City Hall to attempt to get into council chambers and see it live, you have two options. You either have to be here when the doors open at like 8 o'clock, and you're not even guaranteed a seat then because there will be a lot of reserved seats, or you're going to have to, or you'll watch it in the overflow room, which is actually the City Hall caucus room.
Yeah.
So tomorrow will be a great day for you to catch me and Larry on WURD 900 AM, 96.1 FM, as we're hosting there for City Council Live.
Yeah, we'll do a play-by-play and we'll describe what's happening. And there are going to be some moments in the meeting where we'll have a chance to do a little talk because, the mayor moves, the mayor comes off the stage. So there's a little bit of room there so we can explain some things, fill in some gaps for you while we're going through it. So it should be an interesting day. But
right now, we have our interview with councilmember Isaiah Thomas, and here we go.
All right, councilmember Isaiah Thomas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Truly appreciate you.
So the first thing I'd like to talk to you about is, I think, the thing that's on everybody's mind right now, the school facilities plan. Can you walk us through your thoughts on what you've seen so far and what some of the changes have been?
So what I've seen so far, I always start by trying to give the district and its leadership a lot of credit. Dr. Wallington, Colonel Hill, they're in a very tough position. This is a problem that they inherited. I know because I inherited as well too. And they're trying their best to put us in a position to right size this issue without closing any of our comprehensive neighborhood high schools. So always give them credit for that, because I think that was the shortcut way to try to get this thing done. And they literally moved in the opposite direction of that. While I don't agree with every decision that has been made, I agree with the intentionality behind it. And I also give them a lot of credit for the level of engagement that's happening right now. They've tried to engage people for some time. One can argue what was best, what wasn't best. But even now, throughout the course of this process, the engagement is still continuing. It's not like they've made a final decision and said, this is what it's going to be. They've been open to dialogue. They've been open to negotiating. And I always start by giving them credit for that. As it relates to where we are right now, the reality is that Dr. Watlington's plan is a $2.6 billion plan. When this conversation started, or when I first came into council, there was a over $6 billion conversation. So again, there are a lot of things that I can say that are compliments and move this thing in the right direction. But then you had schools like Conwell, Paul Robeson, now Lincoln is one that's on my list now. These are schools that I'm not quite sure how they made it to the list, but they are staples in the city of Philadelphia. When we talk about smaller institutions, putting people in a position to have intimate atmospheres, I don't want to move away from that. I know that from a fiscal perspective, it costs us a little money to have a Saul High School and a Lincoln High School separate from each other, but it's worth the investment when we're talking about our children. They're worth every investment. They're worth every dollar. So the process itself continues. I definitely appreciate the engagement of all legislators because this has been a significant amount of engagement from folks. But again, the process continues, and I'm optimistic that we'll find a way to land somewhere that is fiscally responsible, but also conducive to what the community is calling for.
At a previous hearing, you had mentioned there were things you liked about the plan, things you disliked, and things you weren't certain about yet. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those things?
Yeah, I'm still in the same place. So, I mean, clearly one of the things I didn't like was Conwell. Thank goodness that's not on the list anymore. But Lincoln still is. So I'm not a big fan of anything happening to Lincoln Parkway West, or Parkway Northwest. I have questions about schools like Wagner and Harding, right? You have Wagner set to be closed, and I'm still waiting to hear, well, how do you make Elwood a K through 8 school when Elwood doesn't have enough space for K through 6? So Wagner closing, I hear you, right? But it doesn't, the plan doesn't, that part I have more questions about. Harding is in the same category. Closing Harding will make some of the elementary schools in the neighborhood K through 8. Well, my question is, you know, how do we have space for that in those schools? I used to run those schools. I used to run those after school programs there. So I know that those buildings are already at capacity. And that was, you know, back in 2015-ish. Elwood, for example, what we talked about with Wagner, I went to Elwood. So I know for a fact, and this is my neighborhood elementary school still today, that when you get to 5th grade, you go to the Elwood Annex in 6th grade, which is a building that we rent from the Archdiocese. We don't even own it as a district. So how are you going to expand in K through 8 when you don't have enough space for K through 6? Those are some of the things that we have more questions about. And then again, things I agree with, not closing any of our comprehensive neighborhood high schools. I think that was the thing that scared me most as I awaited the facilities plan, and to see that that wasn't done at all when you're talking about Overbrook, Strawberry Mansion, other schools that are severely underutilized as it relates to the buildings. I just appreciate the intentionality to not close those historic buildings who are pillars in our neighborhood. When you think about Germantown High School, when you think about Bike High School, when you think about William Penn High School, you know, I don't know if we ever recovered from those schools closing.
Do you think there will be any further changes as this process plays out?
I will hope so. I think things are continuing to shift. It's a fluid process, and that's the part that I give Colonel Hill and Dr. Watlington a lot of credit for, because they could have just said, you know, this is it, and you know, we're not moving, but they're not doing that. So I will hope that we continue to dialogue, continue to brainstorm, because I'm not sure where we are is I don't think where we are is the best possible landing spot. I think we can do even better.
At one point, you had discussed the possibility of separating facilities management from the other parts of what the school district does in terms of like education and things like that. Would that have helped in this process? Is that something you're still looking at? How would that kind of work?
I think it's happening kind of informally. What we talked about was a school building authority, and we talked about it from two perspectives. The first perspective was to give people an opportunity to donate to the facilities crisis without the money going directly to the school district. So the money will automatically be earmarked for facilities-based things. And then the second thing was just to have something similar to what we see with PIDC, focusing on school buildings, specifically building the building from scratch. We never really talked about pulling maintenance away from the district. When you're talking about repairs and maintaining buildings, we never wanted to pull that away. But when we talked about building out new school buildings and doing that based on population shift and other geographic information such as that, we thought that should be a separate party. When you look at what we're doing right now, it's quasi like that. It's kind of like that. So PIDC is partnering with the district to build out new buildings. But as you can see, the idea of what the actual plan is as it relates to the future of facilities, the future of public education, that clearly has been a fluid process that has included a lot of voices, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Okay. Switching gears a little bit, the mayor's budget address is this week. What are some of the things you're hoping to hear from that budget address, or things you're keeping an eye on?
What am I hoping to hear? I don't know. I don't. That's not the best answer, right, Larry? But I don't.
It's
I'm just
honest.
I'll say I'm waiting to hear, right? Like, it's no secret that, philosophically, I've offered different opinions in the last budget than the direction that we've decided to go in, and I've been a minority when it comes to that, and that's okay. I think that part of a democracy means having your own individual ideas and having your own individual method as it relates to the direction of the city. I think from an intentional perspective, we're all well intended. We all want the same things. I just think we have different paths as it relates to how to get there. So I'm just going to be on standby like everybody else in the city of Philadelphia, listening to what the priorities are going to be, where the administration wants to focus their investment, and hope that that investment turns into things like addressing the poverty issue in the city of Philadelphia and putting us in a position to see significant job growth. That's a huge problem. Folks talk about the affordability crisis in the city. Things like still with councilmember O'Rourke the other day, and the idea of putting some dollars into making SEPTA free for folks. I always think that that's a good investment. So I'll be listening to a lot of individual one-off investments. I don't know philosophically if there's going to be any big thing like home or what we've seen in the past as it relates to soda tax and things of that capacity, Sixers Arena. I don't think it'll be anything big like that in the budget this year, but I'm on standby just like you and Denise and everybody else, waiting to hear what's next.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, and thank you, Councilman, for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all you do.
A recent piece of legislation that you got passed that is going to lead to a referendum on the May 19th primary ballot is the resign-to-run provision. You want under this provision, resign to run, particularly for members, for elected officials, wouldn't be the norm anymore. I guess my question is, if this is passed, well, first I'd like to know what inspired you to take this issue on in the first place, and secondly, why isn't it a little more inclusive when it comes to city workers?
Yeah, I think those are two great questions. I think the first thing that really put the battery in my back to try to take this issue on is just the lack of representation that Philadelphia has outside of local government, right? When you look at statewide seats, when you look at congressional seats over the last 50 to 75 years or so, the only person to go from a legislator on a local level to anything else is actually Lucian Blackwell, unless it's mayor, right? So people will do it for mayor. But other than that, for the most part, we haven't really seen folks willing to step out there and put themselves out there and try to represent Philadelphia in other capacities besides just being a city representative. So the spirit behind it is looking at the congressional race that's happening right now, paying attention to other races that are going to happen in the future. We want to put Philadelphia in a position to be able to put our best foot forward as it relates to all of these offices. And I think with resign to run, we've been limiting that. The second part of your question, in my mind, this is just phase one. When I introduced the legislation originally, the goal was just to wipe out resign to run completely because I don't think we actually need the legislation. I just don't. I don't think it's serving its purpose at all. So the goal was to wipe it out. We landed at a compromise where we're hopefully just starting with city elected officials. And if we see that we can get it right with city elected officials, I would be more than willing to come back to the drawing board and try to wipe it out completely so that it just doesn't exist. City workers, city elected officials should be able to abide by the same rules and the same governance that state and federal elected officials and city and workers do. And currently, right now, that's not the case. So in a dream world, this is phase one, where we can make it so that elected officials, both on the legislative as well as in row offices, don't have to resign to run. Hopefully we get it passed. Hopefully citizens like where we land, and hopefully we can come back in a couple of years and revisit this matter and get rid of it completely. That would be a dream path for me.
Now, this will be the third time that resign to run has been on the ballot. And the other two times where it was attempted, it lost. It was voted down. How do you get Philadelphians to, I guess, come around to your way of thinking on this? Because the reasons why it's been voted down in the past is a fear of, I guess, corruption, for want of a better way to put it. How do you convince voters that this is something that we need for Philadelphia to be better represented statewide and in other places?
I think the congressional race helps. I think the fact that we have an open congressional race, which is something that we haven't seen in recent history, the way it is right now, with no incumbent actually running for the race. And when you look at that race and the importance of that race and the significance of that seat and what that seat means, especially to Black communities across the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, no one resigned to run for that seat. No one, not one person said, I will resign to run for that seat. And look, I'm not knocking the people that's running, right? But I know for a fact that I have some amazing colleagues here on the local level, on the city side, who are just as amazing as the folks on the state side, who probably would have entertained running, but couldn't do it because they would have had to resign. And it puts Philadelphians in a position where you're not able to advocate for the best representative, the best possible person, because we're limiting who can and who cannot do it. So to me, the congressional race is the one thing that's different than previous times it's been on the ballot. And I think that overarching idea with the fact that there are people who were approached, including myself, about the possibility of running for Congress and couldn't even entertain the conversation because you're not going to resign. I'm not going to resign from my current seat on city council to go out for another legislative seat such like that, a legislative seat such as that. And I think other people are in the same category as me. And if you look at history, in the history, since resign to run has been law, you can't find anyone who resigned from their position to run for another seat that's not mayor or not an executive, besides the Lucian Blackwell example we communicated.
Now, go back to the school district's facilities plan for a moment. One of the things that was said by members of council when the plan initially came out was, we have no problem withholding money from the district if this plan goes through as is. Has that discussion continued among council members? And do you feel like you got even some of the questions you had when council when the school district came before council a couple of weeks ago? Do you feel like you even got some of your questions answered?
So thank God that the plan didn't go through as is. So we've kind of moved away from that. As it relates to funding is always going to be a conversation, not just about taking money, but also about adding revenue. We know that the district has a deficit that they're facing next year, and we don't want to wait till next year to try to fill that gap. So that conversation is always taking place. We're always in discussion as legislators, as well as with the district, to figure out how much and what priority do we fund the district at. So that's definitely going to be there. What was the second part of your question? I apologize.
Do you feel like any of your questions got answered in terms of how the school district made the decisions it did and what it took, what things it took into consideration? Some
questions got answered, some questions didn't. That's the kind of tap dance that happens anytime we have these type of hearings and conversations. I'm not going to criticize folks for not directly answering all questions, because I also know that the same people we're asking to answer those questions give us a lot of access to them. So it's not difficult for me to follow up with a Colonel Hill or Dr. Watlington to get some answers to individual questions that we may have arose about a particular school and how it got on the list. So I understand the song and dancing, some of the tap dancing that has to take place when we have these type of formalities. But I also know that the level of communication is at an all-time high. And while we still haven't found, I guess you could say, a happy ground or happy landing place that we all agree upon, the one thing I will give them credit for is communication.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, my co-host, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you so much, Denise, and Councilmember Isaiah Thomas. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, we
There
are
we go.
here.
We'd like to thank Councilmember Thomas for joining us on the show tonight. And now we'd like to bring on Lance Haver, who will introduce an interview he did earlier this week.
Good evening. That was an interesting interview. The council member named a number of schools he thinks shouldn't be closed, and I'm not sure which schools he thought should be closed. But I'll leave that to Lisa to ask later, and hopefully we'll get a better understanding of which schools the council member and the council members believe should be closed and why. I'm here tonight to talk about something I think almost everyone who pays an electric bill knows. PICO rates have gone up. They've skyrocketed. And it's not just because it's been a cold winter. That is part of it. If you heat with electricity, even if you use a heat pump, the colder the weather, obviously the larger the bill. But it goes well beyond that. And what we're going to hear is an interview with the Vote Solar Mid-Atlantic Region Director, who's going to lay out the reasons why the PICO bills are so high and why they're going to continue to go up unless we get more of action. So why don't we show the video, the interview? She was very kind to spend an We are very fortunate to have this afternoon Elwyn Corby, who is going to be speaking a little bit about why your PICO bills are so high, what the future looks like, and what some of the possible solutions are. So Elwyn, if you could introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Lance. My name is Elwyn Corby. I am the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director with Vote Solar and Vote Solar Action Fund. I'm based in South Philly, and Vote Solar is a nonprofit that works to increase equitable access to clean energy with a focus on affordability and reliability and making sure no one gets left behind in the clean energy transition. So energy bills are a big part of what we pay attention to these days, and making sure that we're doing everything we can to invest in a real affordable energy future. And that really does mean clean energy.
Thank you. So PICO bills. I know a lot of our viewers and our readers are opening up their bills and are unhappy, some shocked, and some concerned whether LIHEAP is going to be enough this year or not.
Yeah.
So can you give us a brief understanding of what's going on in the bills and why they're surprisingly high for many people?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple things that go into it. And first, I should say, I absolutely feel your pain if you've noticed your bill going up. We're in the same position through this. And unfortunately, low-income communities and communities of color are far more likely to feel the worst impacts. There's a number of reasons why bills are going up. So, of course, we just had an incredibly harsh cold snap. And that means that in all of our homes, but especially homes that are not well insulated, there are a number of structural reasons outside of the weather why we're seeing our bills go up, and it's important that people know about them. One is that Pennsylvania's energy system operates as part of a regional market. It's known as PJM. You don't need to know what the acronym stands for. It's not helpful. And it's an incredibly difficult to understand organization, but it plays a few key roles. It handles the movement of energy across our region. That's 13 states plus DC. So it's a really big region. And it also runs wholesale energy markets. So the power we use, much of it, unless we're generating our own power or buying from a third-party supplier, it is procured on this regional market, and the prices are set based on supply and demand.
So maybe we could back up a little bit. When you open up your bill, there's several parts to it.
Yeah.
There's the part that's still regulated, which is the part of the wires that go to your house. Then there is the cost of the actual reading the meter and service, which is also regulated. And then there's the part I think you're talking about, which is the generation of electricity. Back in 2000, a number of states across the country deregulated their generation of electricity. In almost every state where the deregulation happened, prices increased more than in states that continued to regulate the generation. But Pennsylvania, where we live, is one of the states that chose to deregulate the price of the generation. Now, taking that into consideration, you were talking a little bit about how PJM buys power. And maybe you could explain that a little bit more in depth.
Absolutely. So you're right. Pennsylvania is one of the deregulated states. About half the states are. And we buy our wholesale power generally on a market. That market is built with the assumption that the demand for energy matches the supply for energy. And when it does, prices stay relatively flat. But as we've seen increasing demand for energy, and while there are a couple reasons for this, the biggest by far is data centers and AI, these hyperscalers who use an enormous amount of energy, and they're coming on and they're coming onto the market and they're saying, look, we expect to use this much energy in the future. That's more energy than we have. So what's happening is prices are rising. All of us are paying the price. I will say this supply and demand mismatch would not be as much of a problem if we could get new supply online quickly. The problem is that right now it takes years to get permission to build most new energy, to build large scale new energy. The way to build energy fast right now is local. So if you're able to go solar and put solar on your roof, you can do it as quickly as your local utility will allow you. But if you're trying to build a new large-scale gas plant or large-scale solar farm, it's going to take years. And until we have more energy, prices are going up.
Let's talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about what fuel is used to generate electricity. But what are the other ways that electricity is generated? And how does what's happening in the Mideast, in the very cold weather, in the spiking of natural gas prices, what does that have to do with the electric prices?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in Pennsylvania, we are a net energy exporter. We frack a lot of gas, and there are a number of environmental and community issues that come along with this. We could talk for an hour or many more about just that. But natural gas is also contributing and will increasingly contribute to spikes in energy prices. Many of us, you and I both live in South Philly. Many of us heat our homes with gas, and the projections for gas prices going forward are spiking. There's a number of reasons also why it's important to think about gas in the context of cold weather. So you'll often hear people say, look, solar is great when the sun shines or when it's warm out, but as soon as stuff starts going wrong, you can't depend on it. Actually, what we've seen in large storms and large winter weather events lately is that natural gas goes offline at a higher rate than is expected. And when some natural gas goes offline, often a lot of it does, because we're talking about, say, pipelines, right? And when a pipeline freezes, it's not just impacting a small amount of natural gas, it's impacting major parts of the supply. So there's a reliability aspect to this, as well as a spike in prices that we're seeing from natural gas.
The PJM grid that buys the wholesale electricity, what portion of the electricity that it's currently purchasing comes from natural gas? And will the price spikes affect that pricing?
So I don't know the numbers for PJM. I will say that about 60% of Pennsylvania's energy comes from natural gas. And that is an issue for a number of reasons. Taking everything else that we know about natural gas out of the conversation, when you put all your eggs in one basket, you can become over-reliant to the point that any disruption within that market can have serious, serious negative repercussions. So we've put all our eggs in the basket of natural gas, and as natural gas prices are projected to increase, Pennsylvanians have a real reason to worry about that. we would be better off with a more diversified grid.
And how does PJM buy the electricity wholesale? Are there auctions? Are its contract? Is there a reverse auction?
PJM runs a number of different auctions. They run auctions for energy, but they also run auctions for capacity, which is basically the assurance that there will be energy in the future when we need it. Now, they buy based on the cheapest energy available to meet what they think they need, right? So if they don't need very much, they'll buy very cheap energy. But if they need more, they end up needing to buy more and more expensive energy to meet demand. And then the final unit of energy they buy, even if it is 5 times or more expensive than the cheaper stuff, that's the price. The price that that final unit demands is what everything else gets paid. So since clean energy like solar has basically it has no fuel cost and is much cheaper when it plays in these regional markets, what you see is more solar, meaning you don't need to buy the expensive stuff. That brings down prices overall. But PJM runs auctions. Yeah, absolutely. So solar benefits people who are able to use it themselves, of course. I think this is well understood at this point. A couple years ago, a couple decades ago, going solar was thought of as an environmental choice. Now it could be that, but it's also deeply intertwined with energy affordability and reliability. I don't think people understand as much about what solar does for the energy bills of those who don't themselves use it. So solar can, as you were referring to, solar can suppress prices on the wholesale market in a number of ways. It can also decrease demand on the broader energy system. Our energy grid is often talked about as the biggest machine in the world. And it's true. It's also a very old machine that was not built for the times we live in today. And upgrading it is expensive, and ratepayers foot the bill. When you generate more of your energy at home, you don't need to do the same amount of upgrading, either on the local or the larger transmission level. And that means that ratepayers have one less expense to worry about. There's also a resilience benefit here. When you generate more of your energy close to where it's used, you don't have to have the same concern if, say, a large transmission line gets kicked out in a storm.
Thank you. I'm sure there's some things that I forgot to ask or didn't know enough to ask about. So for the next few minutes, what I like to do when I do interviews and say, what is it that I didn't ask you that you think is important for our viewers to hear?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a couple things. We've just seen the numbers come out for utility profits, the most recent numbers, and they are honestly staggering. Exelon, which is Pico's parent company, had great rate of return. I'm sure all of their shareholders are feeling very happy, but unfortunately that rate of return comes at the expense of ratepayers. Utilities make their money based off of what they build and also based off of what public utility commissions allow them in terms of their return on equity. Pennsylvania has one of the highest return on equity in the entire country, almost 13%, which if you were able to find that sort of return on an investment in the market, you would be, it would be very unusual. So right now we're seeing bills go up, but we're also seeing profits sky high for our energy companies. And that's something we need to be paying attention to. That's something we need to be reforming.
So I want to push a little bit on that. The Public Utility Commission sets the rate of return. Who appoints the Public Utility Commission?
That's a great question. So the Public Utility Commission is appointed, they're political appointments. In Pennsylvania, we don't vote for our Public Utility Commission members, and they also need to be approved in Harrisburg. So Pennsylvania has a lot of work to do in terms of allowing our Public Utility Commission to kind of meet the future.
Okay. Would it be fair to say for every elected official who has been in office who's now talking about affordability, that part of the reason why electric bills are not affordable is because of their collective decision who to put on the Public Utility Commission?
I think that's an interesting question. There are places where the public is starting to pay more attention to this and is starting to become outraged. Our elected officials are increasingly paying attention. There are moves in Harrisburg to pass legislation that would hold data centers accountable, and the Public Utility Commission is also working on a model tariff that would help to hold data centers accountable. Now, all of this is incremental, right? None of these are perfect, and none of them are going to be the thing that fixes the problem, but it is a sign that people noticing the problem and starting to raise their voices does help. At the PJM level, it's harder because PJM is governed by a board, but it also has voting members who have a disproportionate say on all of its decisions. And these voting members pay to play. It costs a lot of money to become a PJM member. And most members of PJM are themselves part of the industry that PJM is deciding the rules of the road for. This puts PJM in honestly a tough situation because incumbent fossil fuel generators, incumbent energy generators of all types, make more money when there's scarcity. So bringing more energy online, which is what the public desperately needs, is not in the financial interests of the voting members of PJM. So bringing attention to PJM is incredibly important. And at some level, we have to deal with their governance issues if we're going to get a structure that works for the people who are ultimately holding the bag. I think it's important to drill down on why we need local solar now more than ever. Local solar can come online quickly when and where you need it. When you look back at World War I and World War II, you saw governments encouraging citizens to plant victory gardens. This was a way of alleviating strain on the broader food system, and by 1944, about 40% of US produce came from these victory gardens. Local solar is a way of doing basically the same thing for our overstrained energy system, bringing new energy online so that people who need it can actually get access. And I know a lot of people can't currently put solar on their own roofs. I mean, here in South Philly, it's really hard. I live in this world and I don't have solar on my roof. We need more ways for people to get access. We need to pass community energy and community solar legislation. We need plug-in solar and balcony solar. We need to be creative and move with the moment because right now people are struggling.
Thank you. If someone has been moved by your words, how can they contact your organization and see what they can do to help move us towards a solar future?
Thank you so much for asking that. So our website is votesolar.org.
So that was it. The three parts of why our electric bills are so high. So I just want to go over it one more time to make
Okay.
it clear. The first part is very simple, actually. The bills are really high because PECO got a windfall. They were given a rate of return. Now, again, electric utilities are monopolies when it comes to the wires and it comes to servicing the homes. So the prices aren't set in a marketplace. They're set by a regulatory body, the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. It's 5 members. 3 of the members were appointed by Governor Shapiro, who now says electric affordability is a big issue, and he's really cracking down on it. The 2 other members were appointed by Democrats. None of these were appointed by Republicans, although Republicans in the state Senate did vote to confirm them. So we have a democratically controlled Public Utility Commission, and we have what's called an Office of Consumer Advocate. That's appointed by the Attorney General, and they're supposed to represent the ratepayers. There's also a small business advocate and a number of other advocates. PECO, like the water department, by the way, water department's filed for still another rate increase, one every year, whether they need it or not, they can get it, so why not? PECO files for a rate increase. They set aside time and they have what they call negotiations. And because they're negotiations, it happens in private. I say secret, they say private. Okay, let's say private. In either case, nobody knows what's being discussed other than the incestuous group that always knows what's being discussed. The Office of Consumer Advocate, without talking to the public, without meeting with the public, decided to give PECO a 12.8% return on its investment. Now, that's about 3 times better than what any investor does in the stock market. Whether you're Buffett or you're some other investing genius, you're getting 4, 5, 6%. The person who's supposed to represent the public gave PECO 12.8%, 13%. It was so much that PECO has had its best financial year ever. Now, it gets a little confusing because PECO is owned by Exelon. Exelon owns a number of utilities, and sometimes you look at PECO and you say, well, what about, how does that work with Exelon? So I'm just talking about PECO right now. Not going to talk about Exelon, not going to talk about their stock prices. You can no longer buy PECO stock. Somebody with my amount of gray remembers a time when PECO was Philadelphia Electric, and then PECO, and then you could buy shares in it, and then Exelon became the holding company, and they own Delmarva, they own Atlantic City, they own Chicago, they own a number of utilities. So each utility is slightly different, so I'm only focusing on PECO. So that's the first reason why the PECO rates are so high. PECO files for a rate increase. The Office of Consumer Advocate says, okay, we're going to discuss in secret, in private, and negotiate a settlement. So there's no rate case. There's no opportunity for people to stand up and be heard. And they agree to give PECO 12.8%. Again, right now, if you're in the stock market, you're making 4%, you're doing well. So they got more than 300% more than what all of the savvy investors are getting. That's the first reason. One of the things that people don't always recognize is if you get a set rate of return, 12%, you want to spend more money. You don't want to conserve a single penny because 12% of $1 billion is more than 12% of 100 million. So you have PECO that's doing everything they can to increase how much money they spend, whether it's in the public interest or not. So that's the first reason why the rates are going up. Let me stop there for a second, make sure I made the point well enough.
Yeah, we follow.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah.
Okay, the second reason why the rates are going up is because of what's called the PJM grid. Now, this is a much more complicated issue, as we heard. PJM interconnects many of the utilities in the eastern seaboard. PJM, right, so what happens is once these states decided to deregulate the generation of electricity, and there were all of these power plants that now were supposed to sell electricity in the free market, the problem came up with, well, if you buy electricity, let's say from a plant in upstate New York, how do you get it? How does it get to you? How does all of that electricity move from generation company to generation company, from generation plant to generation plant? And so PJM connects all of them. But it was never set up to do what we're asking it to do. So it was set up just to be there in case one of the power plants went down, an emergency, there was a shortage, there was some problem, and then it would take power and move it to someplace else. So that means that the infrastructure was never developed to do what we're asking it to do. So there is what's called congestion. And like every other complicated, expensive thing, they make up words to make it really hard to understand what's happening. So they say, well, they're going to have an auction that's going to deal with congestion, and they're going to have an auction that deals with capacity. Well, for most of us, what does that mean? Congestion's when you have a cold, or maybe when you're driving. But what does it mean to say there's congestion on the electric wires? And what's capacity mean? Well, it turns out that as the power companies have figured out the best way to make money is to close their power plants, so there's a scarcity, then the new people come in and they say, well, we're going to have an auction and you're going to have to pay extra to be guaranteed electricity in the future. And that's the capacity auction. So as we heard, PJM has made it very difficult for new projects to connect to the PJM grid and to be able to sell electricity. And that is because it's in their interest to make sure there's a scarcity of electricity. So the fewer plants that are online, the more precious the existing plants are, the more worth they have. And because PJM is controlled by the electric utilities, and it's really easy. The new chairman of PJM comes from the electric industry. In fact, his life is based on what's happening. So there is a problem there. And to Governor Shapiro's credit, he has said he's going to try and address that. He wants PJM to go ahead and file with what's called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which most people call FERC, for new rules. Now, again, it would be much easier for him to address what he can control, which is the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission or the Pennsylvania Office of Consumer Advocate. But instead, what he's doing is he's saying, well, we're going to put pressure on FERC. Now that, again, it sounds great and he should get credit for it until you think this through. Well, who's running the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission? A Trump appointee. And the Trump appointees are opposed to renewable energy. So you have, on the one hand, the absolute knowledge that the best thing we could do is bring solar projects online very quickly. And the person who's in charge of making that decision, who Governor Shapiro is appealing to, is a direct appointment of President Trump, who thinks that whales are being killed by windmills. And I shouldn't be laughing. I know it's really not funny. But you have somebody who thinks that solar doesn't work and has completely missed the point that there are ways of storing solar energy. And as Ms. Corby mentioned, natural gas has significant problems when it's freezing. If you lived in Texas during the cold snap, you would have had no heat because the pumps, the compressors that pump the natural gas through the pipelines froze and broke. So it is true that there can be problems when you have a bunch of cloudy days, but it is also true that when you have a bunch of freezing days, you have problems. And the price of natural gas during the cold spell went up 400% on what's called the spot market. So that's the second reason why we're looking at massive rate increases. Again, first reason was very high rate of return so that PECO got windfall profits. By the way, Pennsylvania gave the largest rate of return of any utility in the nation. The final reason is data centers. And again, I recognize that this is somewhat confusing, but here we go. Most states are losing farms, and most states are losing factories. So we again can talk about whether President Trump meant it when he said the tariffs were supposed to bring manufacturing back to the United States and that he's the farmer's best friend, or he didn't mean it and he was just outright lying, or he didn't really know what he meant and it's just all this confusion because he's a showman and all he does is hold up a shiny thing one place and hope no one looks someplace else. Whatever his reason for it, we are losing manufacturing jobs and the number of farm bankruptcies is at record heights. So what do our elected officials do? Instead of solving the farming crisis, instead of doing something to save production jobs that pay a lot, they're giving huge subsidies to bring in these massive projects, which are basically things that store computers. Now, computers use a lot of electricity, not just because the computer gets plugged in, but because the plants, the buildings, the solar, the the servers have to be cooled. So on the one hand, the states are saying, we'll give an AI plant a huge subsidy to move to Pennsylvania. And on the other hand, they say, and don't worry, Mr. AI job owner, we're going to subsidize your electric bill by forcing consumers to pay higher rates so you get a better deal. And that's the third leg of why we're facing this situation. Now, again, there's discussion about what to do to make AI pay for its own electricity, but here's where, again, it gets scary. One of the solutions is to turn 3 Mile Island back on and have them use the
The
nuclear.
same 3 Mile Island that
Yes.
blew
Yes.
up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So, right. It's just, again, I know I shouldn't be laughing at this. But this is the type of thing, if you heard it on Saturday Night Live, you would think this is a good comedy routine. I know, let's solve the problem of higher electric bills by putting President Trump's FERC in charge of it. I know the way to solve the problem of not enough electricity is to turn the nuclear plant that melted down back on and say, well, it's only that one. There are two left. So what's the problem here? Or that many people really didn't die when 3 Mile Island melted down. And Chernobyl really wasn't as bad. You know, there's wild animals living in the Chernobyl dead zone now. So it's really not as bad. And what's happening in Japan with that power plant that was knocked out during the tsunami and completely destroyed that area of Japan, it's really not that bad. You know, another 100,000 years, it should be all right. So that's the three-part problem. One is, why is there a secret settlement that gives an electric utility 3 times the normal rate of return? Why is it that somebody thinks that FERC, run by President Trump, is going to help us? And why do we have to not only subsidize these AI centers, these data centers, with tax dollars, but we also have to subsidize them by paying higher electric bills? And
Now, I can't remember off the top of my head, but Governor Shapiro did mention something about data centers and AI in his budget. I'll have to look up the budget and see if I can find that.
right, you're absolutely right, Denise. That's exactly right. To his credit, he has acknowledged the problem. But if you read through what his solution is, part of his solution is to ask FERC to solve the problem. And that's where it becomes really questionable. Maybe he knows something I don't know. Obviously, he's an intelligent man. Obviously, he has better information than I do. But it kind of doesn't pass the laugh test to say we're going to have to rely upon President Trump's appointment to the chair of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, whose goal is to cut red tape so there's no more environmental studies of what happens downstream. And that's an exact quote. She's not going to look at what happens downstream anymore. She wants to approve plants while they're doing the environmental study. So in her mind, someone applies to connect, and while they're looking at it, they're granting the license. They're not going to wait to see if it's safe. They're going to start doing this both at the same time. Now, again, maybe Governor Shapiro has faith in the federal courts and that he believes that by the time this happens, he's going to be able to go to court and win. That is how he was able to knock a significant portion of the rate increase from PJM down, by using the courts and filing a challenge to PJM. But like a lot of things, PJM settled, and it's hard to believe that PJM settled to hurt themselves. It's just a question of how much did they need, and if they're settling, I'm arguing that they're getting what they need. And Governor Shapiro, again, at least he stood up and did something, and I don't want to lose sight of that. He didn't focus on what he could control. He focused on PJM, which he can't control, and maybe he could give back every single dollar in campaign contributions he's gotten from utilities and utility lawyers and utility consultants. Maybe he could do that. Maybe he could close the revolving door so that people who work for energy companies aren't allowed to control FERC. Maybe he could at least talk about that revolving door. But instead, he says he's filing with PJM at FERC to come up with new rules so the rates aren't so high. But you're right. In his budget address, he talked about the black box settlements. He specifically said what had happened in the past created the problem, but he didn't talk about who was responsible and how it was his appointment to the commissions that approved it. He didn't talk about how it was the Office of Consumer Advocate who approved it. He just said we can't have these black box settlements anymore. I'm hoping that the Philadelphia Water Rate Board, which has settled cases year after year after year after year in black box settlements, got the message from the governor. But I suspect they didn't, because they just filed for another rate increase. And unlike in past years, they didn't send out a public notice. You have to go to their webpage. And I know everybody here is very excited to go to the webpage of the Philadelphia Water Rate Board to see when the deadline is to go ahead and file to become what they call a participant. Just to close the discussion, if you're interested in how incestuous the rate board's advocate, the rate board and the water department is, the water department filed for the rate increase. The next day, the rate board's advocate filed a bunch of questions. Now, I'm not as smart as everybody else, but I'm not dumb. I'd like to think that you would read what the filing said before you filed for discovery. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to file for discovery if you haven't read through the filing, and the filings are lots of pages. So it's hard to believe that the water department didn't give the rate board's advocate advance copies of what they were going to file and give the advocate a chance to prepare their documentation for the next day. So the public is left out. Nobody knows what's going on. We'll be covering it, but that's like what happened with the electric rates. And this is one of the reasons why rates are so high. And hopefully we're going to hear better news about the budget.
Well, I'm not sure if the budget is necessarily going to address any of this.
Well, there is the water department in the budget, right? And there's PGW in the budget. And I think from a consumer perspective, one of the important parts of the budget is going to be projections of the real estate tax reassessment.
Yeah.
So we're going to be able to look after, I know you can't talk about it tonight, but after the budget's out there and we get a chance to look, we're going to get a chance to see how much more they're projecting in residential real estate tax collections this year, this coming year, than last year. And it's going to be really tricky because all of the office buildings in Center City, Philadelphia have had tremendous reductions. First of all, they're worth tens of millions of dollars, even at their reduced rates. So it's easy for them to hire a lawyer. If your house is worth $200,000, $300,000, it's not worth it for you to hire a lawyer to save $1,000 on your taxes, because it's not fair to the lawyer to expect them to work for free. But it's also, if they charge you $250 an hour, which is a bargain rate for lawyers, and it takes them 10 hours to win your case, even if you get $1,000 reduction, that means you lost $1,500.
Yeah.
But the $1 million buildings, it's worth it. So we're going to see this tremendous reduction in tax collections for the office buildings. The clothespin building was just sold, and it sold for 40% of what it had sold for previously. Wow. And this is what's happening. I mean, as Center City got hollowed out from COVID or whatever reasons, and City Council and the state have made it much more fruitful for developers to turn these buildings into condos by offering 20-year tax abatements and low-cost capital. But until that's done, the buildings have not a lot of value in the open market, and that includes the beautiful Wanamaker's building. And we are fortunate the people who bought the Wanamaker's building appear to be doing a great job at preserving the courtyard, the organ, the eagle. Not every developer.
Well, the organ and the eagle are both protected as national monuments, as historic monuments. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't do anything to them anyway.
In the tradition I was raised, the expression is from your lips to God's ears. I mean, if you had told me that they could take down the pictures showing the enslavement of African Americans, I would have If you had told me that 2 years ago, I'll be honest, I would have laughed at you. I said, no way they can do that. How could you not tell the full history of the United States?
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. And we will be back next week on Hall Monitor, and we'll have our big budget show where we'll tell you everything that's happening with the budget. So we'll see you next week. Right.